Welcome to the first of 7 videos from the Roman Army lecture on strategy, frontiers, and war, I believe. Right, in this first of 7 videos, I'm going to introduce the larger topic and subtopics, and then talk about war and values in the Roman world. Okay, get rid of my face with its fancy new haircut. Right, so building up to war. Okay, starting off with the Roman army. Here's the title page. Apologies for the airflow sound. Okay, strategy, frontiers, and the military environment. So basically, this lecture is all about building up to war, building up towards our 3 characters, Pulo, Aurelius Polion, and Aemilianus going off to war, and in particular addressing what are some of the things that impacted whether or determined whether the Romans went to war. And this first video again is on values, but then we're going to spend a couple on strategy, and after that look at what role the forts where the soldiers lived, what role do they play in all this. I'm going to look at some examples from 3 different environments: Britain, Bulgaria, and Jordan, and then I'll look at some evidence for actual planning for war. Okay, so war and values. So the way that the Romans approached the world, their worldview, their mindset, this had an impact on whether they might go to war. And some of the values that had a particularly prominent impact include fides, which is faith, in particular dutifully performing one's duties and obligations. So in the military context, and especially I guess in the Republican context, if the Romans have an alliance or something with some sort of regional neighbor or whatever, they often felt obliged to uphold their part of the bargain, especially if, depending on circumstances, their ally ran into trouble, which is something that sort of cropped up in the case of the Second Punic War, again a bit before our time. Obviously, glory was important, and some of you who've looked at the biography assignment will see that there are certain individuals, especially the guy who lops off Decebalus' head, are concerned with glory, and there were a lot of generals and commanders who were responsible for this in the Republican era, pre-emperors, and if you were successful, you could get voted a triumph, this big parade, and the notion of victory was pretty much everywhere you looked, and this is actually true throughout most of Roman history. You see it reflected in literature, art, coins, epigraphy. When you get to the emperor, much of that glory gets subsumed in the person of the emperor and possibly members of his family, because you couldn't go off giving too much glory to non-emperors because they might take the throne. And you can see this reflected, for instance, in Augustus's res gesta, his deeds. Honor played a big part too, and connected with that, retaliation. So the Romans were quite keen on not just their personal honor, but the honor of the Roman people, and they often sought to assert, enhance their honor and majesty of Rome. Related concepts here with the Latin terminology: decus, honor, face, and majestas, majesty. So these also kind of contributed to this. If they felt they could improve their honor by going to war, or retaliate for lost honor, shame, something like that, then that might impel at least some Romans to go to war. And when I say some Romans, I mean the ones in a position to lead them to war in the first place. People like Pulo, and Polion and Aemilianus, they're not at the top. They can't make decisions, but those in charge of them possibly could. To give an example on some other examples of what might impel people to go to war, but now just to also look at the kinds of war that were out there. The last 2 slides. So we have this quote from a very interesting discussion on international relations from the Cambridge History of Greek and Roman Warfare, Volume 2, by Harry Sidebottom, who's also written some few novels. He says, we have to forget about, or at least question, the existence in Rome of various things we tend to regard as timeless. So yes, they have all these values, okay, impinging on their behavior and decision-making. We also have to think the next point, which we'll come back to in a later discussion of strategy, is we need to be thinking about the various tools at their disposal when it came to deciding whether to go to war. So diplomatic archives and experts, topographical maps, continuity of relations between states, permanent embassies, and the like, and proactive policies, even coherent and explicit policies at all. The preconditions which underpin the emergence of the Western norms, a multiplicity of stable polities which recognize their broadly comparable levels of political power and cultural attainment, did not exist for Rome in this period. Roman ways of thinking about the Roman Empire and its neighbors largely preclude the creation of structures similar to those of post-Renaissance West. So as we go forward in this topic, and it's a big topic, there's been many books, so I'm only just, teensy bit. That's why we talk about values, introduce values, because those contribute when they go to war. You should read Susan Mattern's book, which is great. And maybe less of the kinds of things that modern decision makers use. Okay. Different kinds of wars that Romans fought too. Here's Adrian Goldsworthy, who's written a lot of stuff from the ancient world and some novels. Again, the same 2-volume collection, The Cambridge History of Greek and Roman Warfare. So he says the kinds of wars that you need to be aware of the Romans were engaged in include wars of conquest. So these involved an attack on an independent people, kingdom, or state. We see much more of these in the Republican period, especially mid-Republican, so right before us, up through Marius and beyond. They still exist, obviously, afterwards. Dacians is a good example, but a bit of an earlier thing. Wars to suppress rebellion. These involve the defeat of a people, kingdom, state, or the followers of a leader, leaders within the empire, and you can see these in the case of the Jewish War, fought in the second half of the 1st century CE, initially led by Vespasian, and then his son Titus took over as Vespasian went off to be emperor. So that there are quite a few examples of these. That one is particularly well documented. One that has had a big impact on a whole host of later things. Then there are punitive expeditions. So these are attacks on a people, kingdom, or state that were not intended to result in the in their permanent incorporation into the empire. You could say some of the attacks on Persia, Parthia, while some of them were designed for conquest, maybe a lot of them weren't. Okay. And then we have wars fought in response to invasion or raiding. These are operations intended to confront and defeat armies, bands, or entire peoples entering Roman or Allied territory without permission. To some degree, the wars waged by Domitian in the build-up towards Trajan against the Dacians were those kinds of things. Dacians raided, and Domitian responded and launched some wars in response. So this is just some of the main kinds of bigger wars the Romans fought, and there'd be battles and sieges in each of them, depending on the context. But there'd be lots of little raids and skirmishes and low-intensity conflict and asymmetric warfare, etc. Probably happening on a more regular basis in some environments. We just don't know about them. Okay, so there you go. That introduces war, values for going to war, and highlighting that war for the Romans was different. At least the planning for war, that's different than it is for a lot of modern things. Okay, and that's it for video 1. It's a bit random.